we're thrilled that sometimes on a bus ride back, you can make new friends. And I was able to do that with some of the folks from the Pac-12 network, of course, who obviously have a great understanding of the University of Washington program. Mike Yam is a studio host for the Pac-12 networks. He's with me right here at our desk here at the Hyatt Regency in Atlanta. Thanks for joining me, Mike. On the fly.
Yeah, absolute pleasure with you. And you're right. You know, sometimes you're on the bus ride and you lift up your head and over a little Chick-Fil-A, all of a sudden you make friends with some folks. So
well,
who would have thought? It
worked out beautiful. Wesley, your vice president of communications, gave me a biscuit. And I'm battling a cold anyway, so that biscuit dried me out. So thank God I was able to grab a bottle of water.
Can I admit something to you? It was my first chicken and biscuit experience that I've ever had.
That's right. Not that common out on the West Coast.
No. You know, our studios are in San Francisco. I'm actually from the Northeast, so it's a different vibe here. But it's been great. Chicken and biscuit.
What did you think of it?
It was mighty tasty.
And Wes and I were talking about the branding. Chick-fil-A, do they do an awesome job or what? There's no doubt this is the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl.
100%. They are handling business down here. But it's been a blast so far. And just to sort of see the passion that you guys have in the SEC, especially around this Alabama squad. I mean, nationally, I think everyone has focused in on this program and said, hey, this is going to be I think some people think it's going to be a bloodbath. Certainly, I don't think that
I don't either.
At all. I think Washington certainly is a formidable opponent. This is not a Kent State squad. This is not a Western Kentucky team. This is the fourth best team in the country. And I think they've done a lot of things to prove that. So hopefully we get a good football game.
Yeah, Mike, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I think the perception versus reality argument is going here. And Lane Kiffin was asked about it, having been a West Coast guy. And he said, yeah, you know, when you get to the South, you understand that Southeast, there's a little bit of, in the Southeastern Conference, some football arrogance, quite frankly. And they don't look at the Pac-12 as playing the same brand of football. Now, having listened to Nick Saban for the last few weeks, he would argue with that. He has said for the record many times, Washington is the best team Alabama will have played. They're physical. They're fast on defense. They play a lot like Alabama. They turn you over. I'm with you. I think this is going to be a great matchup. And the one thing that Washington has is when you're the underdog, you've got a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah.
You're playing hungry. They've got nothing to lose because if they do lose, they'll be disappointed. But folks will say, well, you lost to Alabama. Who cares? Yeah.
100%.
So I think they're going to carry an edge with themselves into this football game. You agree with that?
Gary, this is exactly what Chris Peterson wants and the exact opposite of what Nick Saban wants to hear. He doesn't want to hear that he is the huge favorite, although it's Alabama, and that's consistently what the narrative is surrounding this program. But Washington is a program, and Chris Peterson thrives on this underdog mentality. It was years at Boise State where he was able to go and knock out some of the big boys. And I think the difference this year, and people are talking about trick plays, you know, I've done some interviews, and everyone keeps asking about those trick plays. Almost
like that's all they run.
It's like a gimmick that they hear. It's a fluke that Washington is here, and yet the reality, and you said it, Nick Saban has said this is the best team that they're going to face this season. Offensively, they got the guy at quarterback who is sixth in the Heisman voting, so it's not like, you know, it's CYO league quarterback and Jake Brown. I mean, this guy can play. I would argue the best wide receiver in the country, and I know he wasn't a finalist for the Blitnikoff, but John Ross is as electric as any player that you're going to have, and that duo with him and Dante Pettis is scary. I think that there's a lot of angles in this game that you can dissect, but to me, skill position, they are as good as any team in the SEC. They're as good as any team in the country. Both of these teams hovering at about 40 points, a little bit more than 40 points per game. But defensively, Gary, as you made reference to, there's some dudes. There's some Sunday guys that are playing on Washington's defense that I think can keep this game significantly closer than I think some fans want to give Washington credit for.
Mike Yam, our guest here on the Budweiser Hotline, presented by Adams Beverages. He's the studio host for the Pac-12 networks out on the West Coast. Let's talk more about the Washington offense because Alabama in this run they've had this season, they are the only undefeated Power 5 conference team. They're 13-0. And you look at a lot of their wins, and they were dominant. But they had scares, too. It wasn't like they just ran roughshod over everybody. Chad Kelly lit them up. They got lit up a little bit by Allen at Arkansas. So they've given up plays in the passing game. And as you said, with Browning and those receivers and watching Alabama all year, the best way to attack them, in my opinion, is to throw the football down the field. Get them in one-on-one situations. They play a lot of man coverage on the outside. If you got wide receivers that can go up and get it, you got the potential to make some plays.
I think, Gary, I think agree with you 100%. I think the biggest challenge for Jake Browning is to be able to have the time to go and do that. When those pressure defenses that we've seen this season, whether it was Utah or USC, and obviously they lost that USC game, but when that pressure was coming, that was an issue for him at times. Completion percentage was way down against SC. Not much. It wasn't a huge factor in terms of completion percentage against Utah. Didn't throw the ball a whole lot in that particular game. But to me, I think you're right. I mean, that's where Alabama's defense, if you have have to say, hey, if there's an issue or one little nitpick that you can make, that's where it's going to be. But I'm a little concerned if I'm a Washington fan about how that offensive line is going to hold up against some of those big boys. I mean, size-wise, just eyeballing it. And look, you can say there's the eyeball test, and there's only so much. It's results on the football field. But there is something to be said when you see these guys standing next to each other. I think these starters and for Washington can hold up, but I think that's when you get down the depth and go down that depth chart. I mean, Alabama is going to be like a hurricane coming towards this Washington offensive line. So to me, that's the biggest issue. They don't kill themselves, though. Washington doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes. Turnover margin has been fantastic for them. They're great defensively at creating turnovers, number one in the country for them. And this is still a team that has thrived offensively in terms of scoring points. So you're right. There are plenty of weapons here.
Speaking of the eye test, and this is a very simplified way of looking at it, but a lot of people around the country are saying, well, Alabama played USC.
Yeah.
Maybe 52-6.
Yep.
Washington played
that
USC.
One, yes.
They got run pretty good. Now, we keep hearing USC is a different football team, and they are.
Yeah.
But is that an oversimplification to say, well, Alabama blew USC out and USC beat Washington, so clearly Alabama should be won?
Yeah, I've heard the argument before, and I get it, and I think that's even something that, as a guy that's watched literally every single game for Washington, every single game for USC, it's something that's ringing in my head, just based off of record, right? Alabama is an undefeated football team. They've shown that they're the best team in the country, and yet when you point to Washington, you say, well, they lost to a USC team that didn't handle business against Alabama. Two things I would say to that. Number one, you hit the nail on the head. They are a very different team. SC, and look, I get it. I don't know how many fans in the SEC, or at least in your footprint, are watching SC on a consistent basis. This is a dramatically different football team. Everything essentially changed when Sam Darnold took over, and I think they figured things out. Guys got healthy. Guys came back from some off-the-field distractions. Clay Helton decided to get some guys off the team. I think there was a major shift in culture. And let's not forget, also, Clay Helton's first game as the true head coach. I think that also played a factor in that ball game. The other thing I would point to is, I mean, you can do the A plus B equals C equation across the country. I mean, people are saying the same thing about Michigan. Look, Ohio State's one of those Final Four teams, and yet they lost to Penn State.
That's right.
And they didn't even win the Big Ten Conference. And yet I think it is an oversimplification of, if SC couldn't beat Alabama, how can Washington go and beat Alabama? I don't subscribe to that.
I don't either. I've watched Ole Miss take it down the stretch.
Yeah.
But they beat Alabama 2 years in a row and gave them all they wanted this year. Sometimes it's about matchups.
And look, Gary, I know you're one of the signature guys around this program, and I think people recognize you as sort of a voice and a guy that's analyzing these games and watching these games really closely. That first quarter against USC and Alabama, SC was outplaying Alabama. They just didn't have opportunities to punch it in. And look, I know your listeners are going to say, well, they didn't score a touchdown. They didn't score on those plays. And I get that. I would argue that Washington's offense is better than USC. So it is something to just sort of keep in the back of your mind.
And it could have been a different game. If USC does cash in on a couple of those early opportunities,
absolutely, maybe
the game goes differently. I want to talk about both the quarterbacks. First, Browning, because when you see a guy throwing over 40 touchdowns, and he's not a great runner, but he's elusive.
Sure.
He can make plays with his feet. I've watched him play a couple of times. He doesn't seem to have the big arm. And I did watch a lot of the Colorado game when he did not play very well.
Yeah.
And I read some accounts up from the West Coast that said his arm was a little bit tired.
Yeah.
Is there something to that? And is he going to be, physically in a much better position after this layoff than he was those last couple of games?
I actually think that's a great point. If you looked at Jake Browning's games earlier in the season and compared them to the end, it's funny, you mentioned the Pac-12 championship game where they matched up against Colorado. Best quarterback on the field that game was the backup for Colorado, and Steven Montez. It wasn't Cephalufau, it wasn't Jake Browning, which is odd to say. But I think you're right. I mean, there were multiple times where balls looked like they were underthrown, and when you have the luxury of having a player like John Ross or Dante Pettis, they made defenses look silly coming back for the football and still able to pick up some significant yardage. I do think that Jake's arm got a little tired. We're talking about a true sophomore here. He is not, to use another West Coast quarterback that's out there, Luke Falk, who's got a cannon of an arm. Mm-hmm. That dude's just whipping the ball constantly. That's not necessarily Jake's game. And I think that this layoff, basically 27, 28 days, whatever the number is, of not playing and resting, I think does play a factor. And I'd rather have Jake right now with the rest than I would Jake, a week after the Pac-12 championship.
Right. On the other side, Jalen Hurts, a true freshman, the first true freshman to start at Alabama in 32 years since Vince Sutton in 1984. And he has his critics. I mean, he was voted the SEC Offensive Player of the Year by the coaches. He is clearly the SEC Freshman of the Year. But there are a lot of people, even close to the program, that say, well, he can run, he's athletic, but he's not a great thrower yet. He's not a great passer. He doesn't read defenses. What are you hearing from the folks out at Washington about, do they feel they can attack Jalen Hurts and force him? He has thrown 9 interceptions. They feel like they can force him to
I think the interceptions is going to be the key here, because for as good as the defense is for Washington, the strength of that defense. Now, we could talk about offense, and offense gets all the headlines. It's the sexy thing to talk about, and I think everyone understands that. Washington's team identity, though, Gary, is their defense, and their secondary I would put up against anyone's secondary in the country. Kevin King, Budda Baker at safety, Sidney Jones. These are guys that are going to be playing on Sundays. They can ball. I mean, wingspan. Now, I think when you look at the secondary plays for Alabama, the difference is not necessarily size in terms of height, but size in terms of girth. I think that's a factor. I'm less concerned about those types of measurables when it comes to corners, but you're right. I think attacking a guy like Jalen Hurts, I think the thing that worries Washington fans is his ability to run with the football, because I think there's got to be a lot of trust on those secondary guys, leaving them on the island, going basically man to man. We saw that a lot from Chris Peterson's defenses this season, where he'll take his best corner and match him up against the best wide receiver and not bring a whole lot of help. He trusts those guys inherently, and I think that's going to be a huge factor in this game, especially when you have a guy as mobile as Jalen Hurts. One game that people can point to, Hurts is a much better quarterback than Brandon Dawkins, the quarterback at Arizona. But that was the first conference game, road game that Washington had played, and Dawkins is so lethal with his legs. And you saw that Washington defense have some issues in that particular ball game. Sam Darnold, same sort of quarterback. I think Sam and Jalen are actually pretty comparable and similar in a lot of ways. So dangerous using those legs. I actually would give maybe a slight advantage to Darnold in terms of that passing game. But to your point, they're looking at this as a possibility to create some turnovers. That's something they've done all season long.
Mike Yam, our guest on the Bud Light Hotline, presented by Adams Beverages, the Gary Harris Show on Tide 102.9 and 100.9, live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel, the media headquarters for the Chick-Fil-A Peach Bowl here in Atlanta. I need to get a break. Can you stay around and do one more segment?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when we come back on the other side, we're going to get into the connections, especially with the Pac-12 guy here, between these two programs with Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, West Coast influence. Now, really, you can see it on offense at Alabama. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the keys to victory for both these teams. Mike Yam, studio host for the Pac-12 Networks, our guest on the Bud Light Hotline, presented by Adams Beverages. Technically not on the Bud Light Hotline because you're here with me, but we're going to get a plug-in for them since they're a sponsor. All right, we were talking about the quarterbacks, and you already mentioned the eye test, and I want you to follow up on that because during the break we were talking about the Alabama fans, and I do think, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think they expect to win.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you, right?
Absolutely. I think the same could be said for the Washington fans.
Yeah.
Right now.
We should. Most fan bases do. And but I have a lot of respect for the Washington team. I've watched them on television, how good they are. But you pointed out something that when you look at Washington starters, there's no doubt they can go toe-to-toe for Alabama.
Yeah.
Where the difference might be is getting on into the roster, player number 30, 35, 40, guys that, are going to play in the game after the first 22. That might be where Alabama has an edge.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for that depth. I mean, I think a little bit earlier, Gary used the phrase hurricane. It's going to feel like that, these waves of player and body and massive body that continue to come at you. And I think that my biggest thing is when you look at the size of the starters, I think maybe there's a slight advantage, and I don't even think it's all that significant in terms of size of in the trenches. And I think we both would probably agree that's where this game is going to be won, especially in these big bowl games like this, to a chance to play for a national championship. That's the crux of this game. And, Lincoln Kennedy is one of our analysts at Pac-12 Network, and he doesn't get much bigger than Link. And, he'll tell you the same thing. There is a wear and tear that throughout the course of a game where it's going to be a major issue, I think, for Washington. If they're able to create a turnover, I think this is a low-scoring game. We were playing, pick a score when we were at the Georgia Dome. I actually don't know if either one of these teams, and look, maybe I'm completely off base here. I thought it was going to be a close game, a 17-14 type deal where you're seeing like a turnover, and obviously Alabama and their defense creating a turnover and scoring. I mean, I think I'm pretty sure they still lead the country in that category. I think you could see something like that. I can see an interception that leads to a touchdown for the Washington team. Now, other people will say, you're crazy. This thing is going to go into the 30s, and maybe so. I still look at the identity of both of these teams and say it's all about defense, and I think the biggest issue and the biggest advantage Alabama has on this game are the waves. Every single possession, every single play they're going to be able to bring towards Washington, I think can be a really daunting thing for Chris Peterson's squad.
Connections between the two programs. Of course, Don James mentored Nick Saban.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks are listening. Alabama is 4-0 all time against Washington. The last time coming in the 86 Sun Bowl. And, of course, the first time the 26 Rose Bowl, which really put Southern football on the map when Alabama stunned Washington 20-19 as a huge underdog, traveled by rail across country and kind of set the stage for Southern football to get some respect, because in those days, Northeast football, West Coast football clearly was thought to be better than the South. So,
times have changed drastically.
But Jake Browning, and Alabama's outstanding freshman right tackle, Jonah Williams, high school teammates in Folsom, California. But where I want to go with this is the former head coach of Washington, Steve Sarkisian, is the offensive coordinator in waiting, so to speak,
100%.
at Alabama, and he's been an analyst all year. Lane Kiffin, former USC head coach, West Coast guy, is the sitting offensive coordinator who's leaving on to Florida Atlantic. You know, you look at this offense under Lane Kiffin, and I guess this is what makes Nick Saban a great coach. You know, he's kind of become what he loathed. I still think he would prefer football 10 years ago when you lined up with 300-pound bodies and you just played smash mouth.
100%.
But you know what? When the spread came into college football and people said Saban was done, he just started doing it himself. And he brings in Kiffin, the Kiffin influence here, the Sark influence, kind of an interesting tie-in.
Gary, don't you think, though, that Alabama's offense in a lot of ways still is that smash mouth?
They can do it. There's no doubt.
Especially when they need, I mean, that's the one thing about this game. Another factor here is their ability to control tempo and clock. And you're right. I mean, Lane Kiffin's going to bring that spread attack, and college football is sort of steered that way. It was interesting because Lane, we were around him today, and he was asked about, you know, understanding the Pac-12, understanding now the SEC, what his thoughts were on a team like Washington. And he said, look, I mean, there's a lack of respect that the conference, the Pac-12 that is really underrated. People don't realize the amount of talent that's coming out on it every single year. You know, I always point in Alabama, you guys know this as well as anyone. I mean, look at all the first round picks that Nick Saban puts into the NFL. When it's money on the line and teams and jobs are in jeopardy at the NFL level, it doesn't matter what team you play for. It doesn't matter what conference you hail from. It's all about, can you perform on the biggest stage? And there's guys that are playing in the Pac-12 right now that can go and do those things. And Lane Kiffin, I think, understands that as well as anyone because of the talent that he got there. And in a lot of ways, some of the best players right now on Washington's team are some of their seniors who were Sark's guys. And Sark did an incredible job. Let's not forget, when Sark took over that UW program, this team was struggling. And granted, it was hard for them to get over the hump and break that 7-win plateau. But once they did, I mean, they got some guys. John Ross is one of his players. I mean, that to me, I mean, you can go across the board and point to some of those guys. And to me, he is as his offensive acumen. Now, I know Lane's leaving, but Sark, to me, what he was able to do in terms of being a personable guy, likable guy. I spent more time with Sark than I did Lane since I've been at Pac-12 Network. Sark's he's on the short list of coaches that you want to go and play for. I can understand how Sark was able to go into a room and get some 4- and 5-star guys to head to Seattle when they were down. Now you have the resources, and he's going to be in on a lot of those conversations for Nick Saban. And you have the resources that Alabama has. I mean, that's a potent 1-2-3 punch, I think, to get some offensive players out there. I still think Alabama's team over these years, all these national championships, these SEC titles, it comes down to what their defense has been able to do. You bring a guy like Sark in to bring in some high-profile offense. I know the dynasty word has been thrown out there. Be hard-pressed to not think that there is not more championships potentially down the road with those guys.
Mike, you pointed it out, and, of course, Chris Peterson's a great coach, and he's built on what Sark started building there. But when Sark got to Washington, they were awful.
Yeah.
And he kind of brought credibility back to that program. I know there were a lot of people in Seattle disappointed when he left for USC. Yeah. We know what happened there. It didn't work out for him.
They're not disappointed anymore.
No. And Chris Peterson has been able to take it to the next level. But Sarkisian really is the coach that kind of rebuilt that program. Yeah.
Set the table for him. I mean, they were stumbling here. We had a debate at dinner, you know, pick your top 4 coaches that you want to have and play for. You know, I think Nick Saban's at the top of the list. I think Urban Meyer's there. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think 3 and 4 are 2 guys from the Pac-12. I think Chris Peterson is there. David Shaw is there. And I got into an argument a little bit later in the evening about David Shaw. And I said, the reason why I don't have him 3 is because Chris Peterson at Boise State consistently, with nowhere near the amount of talent that the Power 5 conferences had, were able to churn out some big wins and come up with some huge victories. And I know everyone's talking about game planning a month for Chris Peterson. Same could be said for Nick Saban. But I think Peterson and his philosophy and what he is doing in this, I think they're ahead. I think they're probably a year or 2 ahead. I think he would probably tell you that as well. But it's as impressive as any coaching job we've seen in the country.
I agree with you. Key for Washington. I know first, obviously, they want to get the game into the second half, into the fourth quarter, and be within striking distance. Anything that just jumps into your head that says if they do this, they can win the game?
Two things come to mind. It's create at least 1 or 2 turnovers in the game and have that lead to points, because I do think this is going to be a low-scoring game. And does Jake Browning not make the mistakes that we saw against USC and some of the issues that he had against Colorado? The other thing is Colorado's defense is as good as any. I mean, I would say Washington and Colorado probably have the 2 best defenses in the Pac-12, and we saw what happened when SC and Clancy Pendergast, who's their defensive coordinator, were able to scheme for Jake Browning. That was potentially an issue for him. And then the struggles that Jake had in that championship game against Colorado. They still win that game, but to me, it's their ability on defense to create turnovers and score off of those turnovers, and then Jake Browning essentially limiting mistakes. And I know he's got to be better than just a quarterback who limits mistakes, but I think you can't give Alabama that window. You give them an inch, and I think Nick Saban's crew takes it a mile.
Mike Yam, studio host for the Pac-12 Network's our guest here, discussing Alabama versus Washington, Chick-Fil-A Peach Bowl National College Football Semifinal on Saturday, 2 o'clock Central Time inside the Georgia Dome. Experience. And I talked to players on both sides today that said, the game's going to be played on Saturday, but this is old hat for Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
Going back to the BCS. And for all 3 years of any college football playoff, this is new for Washington. Not only is it new, they've had to fly across country. It's farther from Seattle to Atlanta than it is to Honolulu.
Yeah.
And is something to that, you think?
I think that's a small factor here. Were you at the College Football Hall of Fame last night?
I was not.
Okay, so an interesting story here, and I think there's a difference between these two programs. We got there early. Washington shows up. They get a tour. They're taking a look at all the displays in the museum, and they're kind of being ushered around the Hall of Fame, and they're experiencing that. Doors are open. The Alabama players, they go right to the food, and look, because to your point, they've been there before. Chris Peterson had an opportunity to speak with him today at Media Day, and I had asked him about that experience. They do something on campus called Real Life Wednesdays. They'll bring in experts or notable people to come and speak to their players. It could be, females talking about sexual harassment. It could be talking business CEOs that come in and just talk about their experiences. And I think that's the difference. And there's not a right way or a wrong way. But Chris told me it would be criminal for these players to not take advantage of the opportunities of playing in this game besides actually playing in the game. And to me, the experience, people say this is a business trip, and I get it. It's about winning football games, and Alabama has done that. This is something that they've done over the years. Washington's coming into this game, and I think if this was 3 years in a row where Chris Peterson's squad has gotten to a college football playoff, hypothetically, I think every single year Chris Peterson's crew would do a tour of the museum, experience all those things that lead up to this game. I just think they're the philosophies. Once again, not a right way or a wrong way. I just think they do it very differently.
Finally, and because your position with Pac-12 Network, you may not be allowed to, but since we're on in Alabama, although we are on the internet everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Are you allowed to make a prediction, or are you going to?
I've actually said that this game is going to be close. We did play the score game, and you're going to get some angry callers calling you up, Gary, saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. I actually still do think it's a 17-14 game or in the low 20s. I think it can go either way. But for anyone who thinks that 2-touchdown line or whatever it is, only reason why I know that.
Pac-12 homer, here come the calls now.
I saw the exactly.
Just kidding.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. But I think to me that's the one thing. I truly do think that this game is going to be closer. Washington has guys on defense that can keep this thing competitive, and to me, that's the biggest factor in this game.
All right, we'll find out on Saturday. Thanks so much for the time.
Absolute pleasure, man. It was great to talk a little football with you here.
By the way, folks, Mike is going to join me on Crimson Tide Kickoff Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Central on WVUA 23, live from the Georgia Dome. So get a second opportunity.
I'll bring Lincoln Kennedy by too. So if anyone, you can
take it up with Lincoln if they got a problem.
If anyone's got a problem with me and my pick, you got to talk to Lincoln Kennedy about that.
Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.